mice lie, monkeys mislead, and the only thing that really predicts response in humans is response in humans, is the general rule. Okay, so you're dead on. Um, all kinds of caveats about these things, but what they show in this experiment is that they don't actually use the spike RNA. They use an RNA that codes for a luciferase, which is the thing that makes the firefly tail go. And that's a really sensitive, we call it reporter gene, because we got good technology to detect photons. And they use that to detect where it went. And they use the least sensitive method, which is to look at the whole animal. So that means that wherever the luciferase goes in the whole animal, the photons have to go up through that tissue, through the bone and muscle, through the skin and hair, and hit the photomultiplier tube, which means that most of those photons bounce around, they never get out. Okay? And so what you get when you use that method, it's really cool. You get glowing mice, like a firefly. But the signal you detect is where the majority of the expression is. You don't detect the areas where there's less expression. And so it's kind of a biased experiment. It is a biased experiment to only detecting the areas that have the highest level of expression. That's a little bit fishy because you're trying to ask the question, where in the body is this protein being expressed? And you would think you would want to use the method that would be most sensitive, but they didn't. Point number one. Point number two, there's a data table there that they radio labeled, so they put tritium, radioactive RNA, and that allows you to really sensitively detect where the RNA goes. And then they used an assay for this novel engineered fat that is what's used to slip the RNA, is the package in the FedEx metaphor. So we have looking for luciferase RNA expression, that says where we're getting expression. There's looking for the tritium on the RNA, that says where does the RNA go. And then there's the assay they use to detect the lipids. What has a lot of people concerned is in this imperfect, small rodent experiment, one of the things that's striking, you see the lipids and the RNA going to organs that you would expect it to go to, like liver and spleen. But the lipid part, strangely, in female rodents, collects at about 12% of the total injected in the ovaries, but not in the testes. That's kind of odd. It also goes to bone marrow and other sites. Now, the RNA, people not in the testes, male rodents, collects at about 12% of the total injected in the ovaries, but not in the testes. That's kind of odd. It also goes to bone marrow and other sites. Now, the RNA, people get a little confused about this. The RNA signal is the right side of that table, and it's the radioactive RNA. And in ovaries, that only shows that less than 1% of the RNA goes there. So for some reason, the lipids are accumulating in the ovary, although the RNA isn't. Why is that? How is that happening? Unknown. Does it mean anything? Unknown. Because we didn't do reproductive tox experiments. And we don't really have any prior experience with this novel synthetic lipid. So a lot of folks got pretty bent up and said, oh, this means that the stuff in the bone marrow is going to cause leukemia. And Steve said these things on the Weinstein podcast, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise with him. But these things were said, that you could have these bone marrow diseases and you could have horrible reproductive effects. And the truth is, I can't say that there won't be problems because I don't have the data. We don't have the data.
So
but it doesn't mean that they're absolutely going to happen either.
Right. And I think
so there you said it. I can't say that they weren't.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I can't
you
either. I
could
was.
say that, yeah, nobody can. Okay, that's the whole problem.
Okay.
Is that the studies weren't done well, and so we're left with all of these coulda, shoulda, woulda. Uh-oh, what's happening? And that's what's a little odd here. Is normally all that stuff would have been cleared up, and for some reason it wasn't. Presumably because everybody was in a rush, because they wanted to save the world for good reason, and they were doing, presumably the best of intentions. But to say to the public no corners were cut isn't really true. And that's where I start to have problems with all this, is I think that the government owes it to their populace to be open and transparent about what's true, what's known, and what's unknown. Because they're obligated to, and a pharmaceutical company is obligated to fully disclose all risks, because this is a fundamental precept of bioethics in human subject research. Full stop.
I think that, I mean, that's fair. That's why the whole field of bioethics exists, because it was abused in the past, right? So it's like the goal. And people,
Completely agree.
yeah, both of those things can be true at the same time. Um,
Yep.
and
Thank you.
yeah, and I think that's like, I think sometimes people will, they try to like, yeah.
I'm a scientist, right? I live in a world in which almost nothing is known. I mean, if you ask me, how much do you actually know about this? 9 times out of 10, I'm probably going to say, I don't really know the answer.
Yeah.
And I try hard to be honest, and that's the nature of science.
Right.
And it's the nature of scientific discussion, is then us scientists in physicians, probably very different from what they are now, having been through what I've been through.
You've been censored. You've been censored a lot, which is tragic.
As have many.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I agree.
I think that this whole meme of me as the guy, I'm not somebody who seeks attention. I don't blow my own horn generally, and my wife criticizes me for that, and wishes I would do more of that. But it's not my style. But now that it's come out that I play these key roles, it allows me to have legitimacy, and I think it may be partially protecting me from the censors that are out there. And what do we do about the deliberate misinformation, such as the paid trolls that are out there? I think this is one of the toughest decisions and topics that we have to deal with as a society right now, because clearly our elections have been subjected to manipulation by these kinds of paid trolls. And I know enough from my work with various clients and interfacing the intelligence community, there are some really powerful tools that can be used to shape public opinion. And I think the Trusted News Initiative was intended to help circumvent that. But the rubber hits the road at the level we were talking about, just average middle class folks that are trying to pay their mortgages, are where this gets operationalized, and they're not, Yale trained MD PhDs. They're just folks trying to make a living, and they've got a list that they have to go through. And if they see ivermectin and COVID in the same paragraph, off it goes. And that's the rules that they're given, and they follow the rules. I think that's kind of what's happening. And I think that we may have to come. So, you're more on the millennial side. I'm at the tail end of the boomers. Both of our generations, but particularly yours, has been subjected to amazingly refined tools for advertising. And you've grown up with